So I'm Yusuke Yokoyama at the University of Tokyo. I'd like to sort of today showcase the radiocarbon applications for Earth science and also the ecological study, so that I hope that this talk is going to be sort of a good starting point or initiate the collaborations for the future between our group and your institutions. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge my students, postdocs, and colleagues, lots of them. I couldn't list it in name, but I acknowledge their efforts. Without them, I couldn't conduct the research that I'm going to show you today. So yeah, it's pity that I couldn't visit the Singapore, but I really hope that I could make a trip near future to visit your research institutions. Okay, so yep. So this is the contents. So first of all, the radio sort of interactions. So the radiocarbon environments. Oops, sorry, screen point is open. Okay. Yeah, so the first two is kind of introductions, and I really would like to tell you that the recent advancements of the technique allows us to conduct a variety of the research, which I'm going to introduce today. And the first example is the sort of big data approach. Of course, big data in Earth environmental sciences is not as big as information technology world, but still much larger than they used to be. And the geohazard studies and others are categorized in this here. And then we now can analyze as little or small as 10 microgram or less carbon samples, so that we can use this technique to understand the climate and also ecological studies. And I'd like to show you some recent developments if you have time still at the end of my talk. So this cartoon is showing kind of a summary of our group's activities. Like we try to understand the Earth surface processes and also ecological or biological changes using the geochemistry or sampling and also the field work. Because our institute has climate modelers, so we try to collaborate together to understand the future changes as well. And of course, the one of the potential targets is to contribute to international activities like IPCC, for example, and MIROC is the model that our institutions developed and contributing to the international collaborating field as well. And IODP is also another main sort of international venue that we can work together as well. So today's main player is the radiocarbon, and the radiocarbon is a cosmogenic nucleus because the radiocarbon is produced in upper atmosphere after the interaction of the incoming cosmic ray coming from outside of the solar systems, and it's coming into the Earth's atmospheres and interacted with atmosphere, and then quickly oxidized as CO2 and distributed all over the world, mainly on the surface, of course. And C14 can be used as a tracer and also the dating methodologies as well. The characteristics of the carbon-14 is that the C14 is a radioisotope, but the abundance is really rare. Of course, carbon-12 is the major carbon isotope, in the surface of the Earth, and it's about 99%, and only 1% is about consisted with the carbon-13. So we often use 12-13 ratio to understand the carbon cycles, but the carbon-14 here is 1/10 trillionth or less. So as if, we try to find a needle in a haystack, I just Google and then, found these pictures, and then one of the, fellow tried to experiment, find a needle in the haystack, and then he actually found. So, but actually we cannot achieve this much time to get the dates for the, environmental sciences. So, we employ accelerator mass spectrometries. So the conventional accelerator in my university is as big as this 6-story, building. So if you have a samples stored or converted into, this tiny, the sample, maybe you cannot see, but this 1 milligram of graphite can be, placed into the ion source and then accelerated and then detected at the end of the detector, and to measure maybe 20 samples per day or two. But because of the size, we have to stay overnight and then tune the beam every 2 or 3 hours. So it's not suited for doing high throughput measurements. So since about 8 years ago, we installed the most advanced accelerator, AMS. It's called single stage accelerator mass spectrometry in my laboratory. And this machine is small so that we can control the beam very stable fashion. And we can also use this to make the high throughput machine. So we can now achieve the measurements as many as 10 times more than used to be. So this machine can make us the measurements efficiency much better. Oops, sorry, the slide is okay now. Sorry, good. So it used to be the time what they call time, the time was limited for the measurements. The samples, the number of samples was limited because of the machine time, but the machine is now stable. So the constraints are mainly coming from the preparations. But the preparation also was improved after we, invented and the machines to prepare many samples. And so the large number of measurements can be achieved. So we can do lots of carbon-14 dates and also the lots of C14 measurements for biological samples. I just would like to explain the power of the C14, which probably many of you know. But this is the picture. This graph is showing the carbon-14 level in the atmosphere for the last 3,000 years. Most of the time in the atmosphere of the carbon-14 seems really flat, but you can see some wiggles. And if we could use the carbon-14 measurements, if we could use AMS, we can detect this wiggles difference as better as 0.1% accuracy. And then you can see this, large peak, which is anthropogenic carbon-14 produced by the surface, nuclear bomb test. And so that our ability to use this carbon-14 variations for the last 60 to 80 years is really good. And if we convert that number to the age uncertainties, is plus minus 1 year or better. And you can see also this picture that the carbon-14 variation in the surface of Earth. And as I mentioned that the carbon-14 extra, carbon-14 was produced by the surface nuclear bomb test. And on the other hand, anthropogenic produced CO2 from the fossil fuels has 0 carbon-14. So we have a big, the end members contrast of the carbon-14 contributions if we'd like to fingerprint, if we'd like to know the fingerprint of the carbon source, for example, going into the different, the carbon reservoirs. So that's the way that we could use to understand the surface, carbon movements, for example. So the number of carbon-14 measurements to understand the past event is important. So I just quickly go through with the cartoons, in the following cartoons. So if we get the sediment cores like this, and then if you can measure carbon-14 samples in different sections, probably you can draw a line like this, and you can get the age model according to this line. But then if you have more money or something, if you can get the more samples, you could increase the number of dates. And then probably you can draw the line, modified line like this. And now these 2 points are question mark according to the total picture, because the deeper sections have to be older than the shallower sections, right? And then if we add a bit more, this picture is much more concrete. So these two is anomalous, and we can have much precise age model according to the large number of measurements. And also additional information can be obtained, like these 2 layers, 2 horizons, probably deposited by the events like landslides or turbulence and so on. So increased number of measurements is really benefited. And if we convert this kind of exercise differences in terms of the age model, can generate like 1,000 years or more age model. And also we can extract additional informations if you could increase the number of dates. So the many dates really matter as well. So I'd like to show some example. And first of all, first one is the geohazard study that we have been conducting. The picture showing here is the Tohoku regions, and the 2011 earthquake generated the tsunami along the northern part of Japan. And this is the Sendai airport, and ground parking spots of the Sendai airport was inundated by the tsunami. And we can see from the excavation site we conducted different sand layers deposited by the different past tsunami. So understanding the recurrence time and also the magnitude of the tsunami is really key to mitigate the future, potential future geohazard too. So we employed, so-called sequential radiocarbon dating on the 7 layers from different trench sites and also different coring sites. So we sampled the core or trench sections from every 2 centimeter intervals. So we conducted lots of different radiocarbon dates, and you can see the layer numbering that is attributed as the past tsunami. And also we have widespreading tephra layers, which whose dates are really well known. And according to this exercise, we can see that these dates are outliers. So we have confidence that this solid line could tell us really confidence, to precise age model in the past. And this was independently confirmed by this tephra layer as well. So this is really powerful tools to do the past tsunami study. And we also have, we do have 4 different trenches along the Japanese archipelago, and the southern part of Japan near the Taiwan also has the subduction zone. And one of the islands in Ishigaki had experienced several tsunami in the past, which was, the wave was covered most of the islands in the past. And you can see the number here is the run-up height of the tsunami in the Ishigaki in the past. And after studying the trench and they conducted the carbon-14 dating, many of the carbon-14 dating, and found that the large magnitude of the events was not limited by this recent events, which was confirmed also by the historical documents, but also at least three different layers or events as well. Not only the tsunami, but also but also the earthquake or uplifted coral terraces study can be conducted. And Junki, when he was, now he's now a postdoc at your institution, but when he was student, and he did lots of carbon-14 measurement together with detailed the field work, as well as geomorphological modeling, and found that the recurrence interval of large earthquake near the Tokyo was not as long as 2,000 years, but sometimes 500 years. And now this number is employed by the governmental mitigation plans. So it's really matter that how often those tsunami and earthquake could be occurred in the past. The magnitude of inundation is not only is important to plan the coastal city. So we have to know how high the wave came in to the coastal regions. To do so, we also have to know the long-term deformation signals of Earth's surfaces after ice age, for example. The Earth's surface is deforming. And this is the prediction which we made for the different part of the world. And you can see the former ice-covered regions has much larger deformations. For example, in Canada, Hudson Bay regions, 6,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago, shoreline is uplifted up until 50 meters or more. On the other hand, so-called far-field regions, we don't see that much large deformations. However, those magnitude is still large enough. So as much as 0 to 5 meters, depending on the coastline. So we also have to take into account that too. So we have been doing this type of study, like a sea level study in different part of the world. But I just would like to show you the example that we did south part of India, Sri Lanka, and as well as Maldives. And the carbon-14 dates also plays an important role as well. The magnitude of the sea level change or Earth's deformation is also due to the water volume or ocean volume changes. So the melting history of Antarctic ice sheet and Greenland ice sheet during like 7,000 years is also important. So please take a look at this dot line here. This is the melting history of Antarctic or Greenland ice sheet, or global actually sea level, seawater change. And imagine that you have an outlet, like a water, and then it's keep increasing, but then it stop the melting, stop these outlets, and this ocean water volume didn't change for the last 6 Ka. We expected to have the observed sea level curve like this. And depending on the rigidity of the solid Earth, you have some variation, but you can see highest sea level indicator age is about 6 K when the stop melting was occurred, and the magnitude is increased. On the other hand, if you think that the Greenland and Antarctic melting was keep going from the last glacial maximum, from ice age to the present, you have this dot line. And then the magnitude of the high stand is much smaller compared to this time. And then expected sea level curve is like this. And in the middle is the 4,000 years scenario. So we compare the observed carbon-14 dated, the sea level indicator together with geophysical model. We found that the 6K scenario, many of the Maldive data and also the southern Indian coastline data underestimate the expected values. And 0K scenario, most of the Maldive corals are located above the sea level in the past. So we think that the 4K scenario is likely case, so that the ice volume didn't change since 4,000 years ago, not the 6,000 years ago. And this scenario, like a continuous melting, is also ruled out. But anyway, we should know that the highest, 4,000 years ago and to the present, the coastline keep uplifting as much as 4 meter in this part of the coastline, whereas the Maldive is much, much smaller. So I just would like to show you one example, which we did near the Hokkaido. This is another coastal regions where we had several tsunami hit on the coastline in the past. So we collected the series of the cores along the coastline, and so we did many carbon-14 dating, and we compare expected sea level curve along these coastlines, so that we, this summary cartoon incorporated this land uplifted signals. So you can see that the 6 Ka, this area was much lower than the present day. And so the same wave height, the magnitude of the damage or, inundation could be differently, recorded in different sites. So we try to incorporate and understand how frequent this area was inundated by tsunami, and how some of them can be attributed as a high wave by low pressure systems and so on. So those combined, those two factors are really important to understand the coastal events in the past as well. Okay, let's move on to the lake sediments. And one example is in Nepal. I collaborated with the series of the European groups, colleagues, and it seems there is some seismic gap, so-called seismic gap is located along this area, and so people are expected that the future large earthquake could be impacted in these regions. However, after we study the lakes sediments in Nepal, turns out that there are post 1505 earthquake was occurred in the past, so that there is no gap along these regions. To do so, we have to understand, or we have to reconstruct the precise age model using, again, the sediment core taken from the high mountain lake in the lake name called Lake Lara. And we collected different samples for different types of the sample for the carbon-14 dating. And because of the small catchment area, we expected that the total organic carbon based carbon-14 dates could do good job to reconstruct the carbon-14 age model. However, we can see some systematic differences between leaf and sediment-based carbon-14. So the leaf is always youngest, and TOC-based carbon-14 is oldest, and the wood fragment are in between. What is showing here is that the leaf can deposit it if the leaf can survive from the hinterland to the lake bottom to deposit it without degradations. They can produce a reliable age model. However, these TOC or wood fragments shows that the residence time of those carbon in the hinterland, even though the catchment area is really small. Therefore, the reconstructing of the age model, even in lacustrine environments or lake sediments, we need to do careful evaluations. Hopefully, everybody could visit to Japan and come to Mount Fuji. You can see this beautiful scene. And we have lakes, alongside of the summit, and one of which is Lake Motosu, and we studied. So if you zoom in, here we are. We are collecting the sediment core by hand, and the students' power, and also, of course, we did also try to collect those samples anyway. And so we found some tephra layers, and so that we can try to reconstruct the volcanic eruption histories. And again, we conducted lots of carbon-14 data together with statistical analysis. And so now we can understand much better way how often Mount Fuji was erupted, and also using the compounds in the sediment core, we can reconstruct the monsoon histories and so on. Those software to do the statistical analysis we published in 2017 and open to the public. So if you're interested in, please take a look. Okay, so now I'd like to show you some example how how the small sample size measurements can benefit it to our studies. So it's called compound specific radiocarbon analysis, and that could solve the Antarctic ice sheet mystery. Of course, Antarctic ice sheet is a huge, gigantic ice mass, and if melted, 60 meter or 70 meter global sea level rise could be generated. However, if we remove this ice, almost half of the ice sheet is located directly on the seafloor. So the part of the Antarctic ice sheet is vulnerable for the global warming or warming temperature surrounding these ice sheet. The other key player is the ice shelf. So at the end of the ice sheet or ice stream, the ice shelf could regulate the speed of the ice stream. And this importance was highlighted. The example shown by NASA in 2002, observing Larsen B ice shelf collapse occurred first time for during last 12,000 years, and occurred only in 3 months' time. After collapsing Larsen B ice shelf, the upstream ice stream's speed was increased 5 times faster than before. And if you look at the Antarctic continent, we have different ice shelf that could play, that is playing an important role to stabilize the Antarctic ice sheet. So we try to see how the Ross ice shelf, changed to become present-day configurations. And because this is the largest ice shelf in Antarctica. The problem in Antarctica to understand the past event is lack of calcium carbonate samples, or almost zero. There's a few, but not much to do the carbon-14 dating. So previous study has been doing the TOC-based carbon-14 dating. And as I mentioned before, from a lake sediment example, the carbon-14 dates could generate potentially much older ages. And Antarctic's case is much worse because there's no trees on land. So basically, carbon-14 signals is diluted. And we also employed another cosmogenic nuclide is called beryllium-10. And it's produced also in the upper atmosphere and then fall down with the dust or the rain. And when the ice shelf is existed, if we collected the coral from sediment core from here or there, there's no beryllium-10 depositions. However, after disappearance of the ice shelf, we expected to get the beryllium-10. So if we measure both two cosmogenic nuclides, we can understand the timing and magnitude of the event in the past. So we use HPLC and GC to get the fatty acid, which is probably generated the carbon produced mainly in the water column, like a zooplankton and so on. So to get some idea how small the fatty acid can be obtained from the sediment, you can see these pictures. This is the sediments, and then we collected the fatty acid here. And then we measure this by AMS to get the age. So this is the sediment core taken from TC0107 site, and the length is about 70 centimeter. And you can see the jump of beryllium-10. So we think that the timing of the ice shelf retreat was recorded in these horizons. But according to the conventional TOC-based carbon-14 dates, this was occurred around 16,000 years ago. So that's in the middle of major global climate change timing, like a last deglaciation. So the CO2 is rising and temperature is increasing, and sea level, and so on. But now our compound specific radiocarbon analysis shows that the timing is much, much younger, and melting was occurred at about 4,000 years ago. So it's in the middle of our integration. So the condition, background condition is similar to the present. This is not only one core, but also other site as well. And all the cores shows that the widespread, melting was occurred around 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. The evidence of 4,000 to 6,000 years ago climate change was not only coming from the sediment, but also the ice core. So this is the report from Richard Alley's group from the Penn States. And they found that the surface melt layer frequency increases from about 7,000 years ago, but much more evidently around 4,000 years ago. And this was also coincided with the delta O18 changes, which is the temperature change and so on. And also that was coincided with the El Nino southern oscillation changes. So there's some connection between high latitude and low latitude climate. Of course, our site, Ross Sea, we are looking at the ice shelf melting. So try to disintegrate the ice. We think that yes, there's some forcing or some mechanisms behind to create those disintegrations. And we think that the warm water intrusions on the continental shelf was the important player to do so. if you look at the temperature around the seawater temperature around the Antarctica, the subsurface temperature is really warm. So if we could change the wind pattern like westerlies, we could introduce the warm water onto the continental shelf. That could create the disintegrations of the Antarctic ice shelf, and that was probably the causation of the this effect. And of course, ice core data shows some connection between El Nino southern oscillations and the present day climate model, as well as ice core data shows that there's some teleconnections between El Nino southern oscillations and Antarctica via SAM, southern annual mode. And so that probably during 4,000 years ago, the widespread Antarctic-wise climate change or ice sheets, this ice shelf change was induced by low latitude phenomena, which is, which could be occurred in the future as well. We also collected similar evidence in East Antarctica lake data as well, and also some other part of West Antarctica, which all shows that the 4 to 5 Ka increased meltwater introductions from the Antarctic ice sheet. Okay, now switching gear to the biology side. Of course, we, under the global warming, the temperature increasing. So we are expecting, we are worrying that the coral bleaching could be diminish some coral reef. So last deglaciation also is a unique period because CO2 was risen as much as 100 ppm from glacial maximum to the Holocene. And the sea level was risen as much as 130 meters, and temperature was risen around 5 to 6 degrees in the Great Barrier Reef. So like a natural warming experiment and ocean acidification experiment was conducted, sort of. So we collected the fossil corals using drill ship of the Great Barrier Reef. And this is a present day sort of picture, we are on board in here, and collected the samples. And these are the dates of the individual corals like this. These are the shallow living corals. And we plotted the depth of the corals obtained in the drill core and age of those individual corals. And after we conducted more than 900 radiometric dates, we can actually draw like lines of the sea level change like this, okay, for one transect and the other transect in the blue. And these transects are apart more than 500 kilometers. So these pictures are really, precise. And then this cartoon shows that the different time slices of the Great Barrier Reef along the sea level rise in the past. You can see active coral reef around this timing. And then when the sea level dropped, this area was exposed, so the coral reef disappeared, but start growing in here. And then as sea level goes up, the active coral growth keep moving towards inland. So the reef itself, it locally was diminished, of course, but it's keep expanding or moving to the shallower site. So we can say that if the sea level rise and the CO2 rise or ocean acidification or temperature, the rate of change is as similar as the last deglaciation period, the GBL coral could catch up. However, of course, ocean acidifications and other rate of change is much faster. So this, this doesn't necessarily apply for the future. But anyway, we'd like to know how much coral could catch up for the ambient environmental changes. So one example showing here is the gigantic coral, Porites in Kikaijima Island in the south. And the other one is taken from the Chichijima, much further south in Tokyo. We try to understand the pH conditions in the fluid in the body of the corals, where they have a classifications processes are going. And for the last 100 years, it turns out that the inside of the coral body, the boron isotopes are telling the pH. They can catch up the pH changes to keep like pH in the body, like homeostasis. However, for the last 10, 20 years, this is kind of reached to the limit. So the ocean acidifications in the inside of the coral is affecting now. We also try to understand the different physiology of the shellfish using culture experiences. And we use the shells and fish and so on. This particular example is a shell that we use for the sushi. So we'd like to keep having a sushi even in the future. And so we set up the aquarium to mimic the natural environment, bubbling the CO2, which doesn't contain carbon-14 because this CO2 is reprocessing, produced by reprocessing of the fossil fuel. So there's no carbon-14, and we can produce different pH, which does have, different carbon-14 concentrations. On the other hand, we prepare the feed, bite of the shells, which is the plankton. So we have much larger carbon-14 values. So if the shellfish change their physiology in terms of the carbon assimilations at certain acidification conditions, we can see clearly from the carbon-14 values, like used to be how many percent are taken from here to change how many percent are taken from the water and so on. And this is the results. I just would like to show you this middle panel that the shell carbon-14 is correlated very well with the water carbon-14 values. As pH decline, like mimicking to the future environmental change, the shell containing the carbon from the seawater. On the other hand, the soft tissue like a foot and mantles are almost 100% carbon is coming from the plankton, like a feed. So there's no change in the assimilation systems, even the stressing from the ambient environment like ocean acidifications. So we can do similar experiments to other marine species as well. In the environments, you can use the fish otoliths because carbon-14 in the high latitude and low latitude has a difference, and the shallow water and the deeper water is different. And so also we can see that the most of the benthic invertebrates in the study area here likes the fresh carbon, fresh food, instead of recycling food like me, we'd like to have a fresh food, so anyway, we can do these types of the experiment as well. Okay, quickly, at the end of my talk, I just would like to show you some recent developments, which is the pollen-based radiocarbon dates. Okay, now I can show you again this picture, but this is the otoliths of the flatfish. We can do carbon-14 measurement as small as this sample size. And the compound-specific radiocarbon dates can tell us the lake sediment or other important informations. However, they're kind of overprinted by the water carbon-14 signals as well. So we think that the pollen is a good candidate for the sediment studies, like including tsunami studies and so on. But the sediment has different particles, so we have to sort it out only picking up the pollen. To do so, carbon-14 measurement required at least 50,000 pollen grains. So maybe I can ask one of my students to pick up the pollen under the microscope as much as 50,000. No, we cannot do this. So, so I thought that we can do some better job. So we developed flow cytometry based pollen analysis, because pollen grain has own like a different fluorescence signals. So after some chemical treatments, even though after, chemical treatments try to discriminate the target sediments to the other, we still have some obstacles. But after the sorting, we can see lots of pure pollens, and second pollen could purify 20,000 or 50,000 pollens to do the carbon-14 measurements. So this is successful. I think we can do more studies using this technique. And we confirm the pollen dates are really reliable comparing leaf dates. This is really consistent, both this depths and this depths from the sediment core taken from the lake at the Mount Fuji regions. Okay, so this is the conclusion. So I hope that I convinced you that the radiocarbon can apply different research topics, and I hope that this can help the possible future collaborations between our institutions. Thank you for your attention.